Hello, welcome to episode 3 of the Modern Game Podcast. Here again, as always, with Josh Forth, and this week we are going to be talking about patience. But before we jump into the topic, how is your game week going, Josh? I'm going to make
Oh,
the listeners be a little bit patient before we really get stuck in.
my game week is mixed. I knew coming into the game week that predicting the Dynamo Zagreb lineup was going to be really, really tough with their Champions League qualifier last Tuesday and then one coming up this Tuesday, and then playing like basically the weakest team in the division in Istra. I opted to play Livakovic, Lawrenson, and Misic in basically my strongest lineup, which in hindsight was probably not the best play or like most sensible play, but I sort of thought the upside was huge in that if they did play, they would likely like just smash. And unfortunately, Lauritsen and Misic were both benched, and then Istra scored like a consolation goal in the 86th. They both did get on the pitch, but yeah, neither scored particularly brilliantly, so that wasn't great. And then a real kick in the stones is my Challenge Europe Rare Pro lineup. I did a split stack, Celtic defence, and Callum McGregor, and Arsene Zakharyan and Svedor Smolov from Dynamo. They were playing newly promoted Fakel. It was all going absolutely superbly with Smolov on 89.8 points and Zakharyan on 81 points in the 92nd minute, when Zakharyan decided to shout at the linesman, get himself a second yellow, and get sent off. So I went from like 200 points from two players to 168 from two players, which is still like not the worst start. But like if Zakharyan had stayed on the pitch, I have a genuine chance of winning the division. Spicer's top at the minute with a full Zenit stack, which got like 490. But like even still, like the three Celtic players, one of them's a super rare, the other one's my captain. So them getting 300 is not out of the question, I don't think, at home to Aberdeen. So I still could get a very decent reward out of this. But yeah, if Zakharyan stays on the pitch, I think I have a genuine shot for a podium place essentially. Zenit did absolutely crush Loco though, 5-0. So I got 360 points off the 4 Zenit lads in Challenger at Rare. And this is slightly frustrating, is that I have the 2020 cards. I think I said to you in chat the other day. Of the 2020 cards, which obviously I sort of bought them at the start of this season thinking, they'll lose the season bonus in like 2 or 3 months, and then I'll have the best cards for like after the winter break and whatever. And obviously there's no more Russian cards, so the 2021 cards are getting the season bonus for all of this year. So I am behind a couple of others in its stacks, which is really quite frustrating. I might have to pay some ETH to change those up. But anyway, that's enough of me rambling on about my game week. I've basically got 2 lineups, even with a shout of a prize. Well, I guess my gas rare is also sort of semi with a shout of a prize, but I think Marco Grohl's going to be on the bench. So yeah, it's going. I'm a bit disappointed with how it's gone, to be fair. What about you, mate?
So yeah, it's been a game week of late drama for me as well. I had my Argentinos Junior stack, who they are really testing my patience because they seem to keep conceding the odd goal here and there. And true to form, they did that again this weekend and conceded one right at the death. I think it was like the 95th minute they conceded in. But it was a bit bittersweet because, on the other hand, Jefferson Savarino who banged one in the 95th minute. So there's been a lot of late action. My specialist super rare took a bit of a hit with the late goal. My specialist limited has taken a huge boost with the late goal. So mixed game week. But I think from chatting to you often, we tend to set ourselves quite high expectations when it comes to our weekly output. So we'll talk about this. People will listen to this and hear us talking about like doom and gloom, and we've had a rubbish game week, and then they'll see that what rewards we get and be like, guys, come on, have a reality check. But anyway, that is enough talk about our game weeks. Let's talk about patience. I thought it was an interesting topic because you and I took very, very different approaches to summer. I already had a pretty solid Americas contingent, but I sold and traded a bunch of other cards, really focusing on being strong over the summer. Whereas you took the approach of sitting out. So I think it'd be interesting, like, just talking about how that was, because you were still very active in the chat. And I know, like, obviously, like, many times we're talking and sharing prizes, and you're like, just counting down those weeks, just counting them down. So
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting from a, just from a strategy perspective of, like, what made you take that decision. I credit you for sticking with it, because all these weeks when we're rolling out here's what we've won must have been a big old test of that patience.
Yeah, that was pretty grim, to be fair. So I think if we rewind, I think the decision comes if we rewind right back to like when I first joined Sorare, which is like February. I think I don't even know how you can check this now. But yeah, I think it was like February 21. I'm a boomer, so yeah. Whenever Gary V joined, I actually had nothing to do with Gary V. I did not know who he was. I did not look at his tweet, but just coincidentally joined at the same time as lots of other people by the looks of things. I actually got in like a week earlier than like the main boom. I think if you look at Sorare data charts, there's that really big steep incline, isn't there, on when you see the peak of the boom happening, basically, and those Felixes and Mbappes were going for crazy money. So yeah, I joined like a week before that and stuck a few, a couple of quid onto the platform, and like the early players I bought, because of the period I joined, they boomed in price massively, and I was able to sort of capitalize off the back of that and make some smart plays. And was sort of competitive in Europe until the end of the European season. So this was like through March and April, and then it sort of finished, right? I had a couple of good teams. I remember having a couple of decent lineups in the Belgian playoffs. Rafailov and Mbakani did some bits for me for Antwerp and these sorts of things. And then it got to the end of the season, and I was like, I didn't really want to put too much more money into the platform. And I didn't really want to, I wasn't really too interested in MLS. And I wasn't really too interested in I think the reason I wasn't interested in it is I love the game week follow, right? At the weekends, I love being able to follow my game weeks, watch the games, check the Sorare data app on your phone, and like follow along with the game week and really get into it. And obviously with those America games and the Asia games, the time zone is just completely different. Like I'm sleeping whilst these guys are playing. So I can't really do that. It didn't get me as engaged with the game as I was with the European teams. So I was like, on that first cycle, I was like, right, I'm going to sit this summer out and just build my Challenger and All-Star teams for the winter throughout that period. So I did invest a little bit more into the platform and picked up some good bargains in the off season. I think like buying bargains last off season was a lot different to buying bargains this off season. I think people have become a lot more educated to what is going on. I picked up the Lars Unestål Super Rare in the off season of 2021 for 0.269 on an auction. So
wow.
it just transferred from PSV to, he was going to transfer from PSV to 20. So yeah, and I had that information, and I was like, right, I'm going to buy this super rare. I bought a rare as well, which I've since sold. But yeah, and I've made a few of these sort of buys to like try and set myself up, and the whole aim was to get to Division 2. At the time when I joined the platform, the higher you were up in the divisions, the more likely you were to win, just because there weren't as many people that could make competitive lineups in those divisions. It unfortunately backfired for me, obviously, because Division 2 prizes are very, very bad. But that was basically why I set myself up and was patient in that first year, is that I just wasn't interested in MLS and in the other America and Asia leagues, and wanted to try and be competitive as competitive as possible for when Europe returned. In the 2022 off-season, the one we've just been through, I actually had a much more different strategy. So in December of last year, I basically decided that I didn't want to wait this summer to wait all of the summer, and I wanted to play some America. So I bought myself a full River Plate stack, and I'd had lots of success stacking Ajax in Europe throughout the winter last year, and was like, I think River Plate are going to be the Ajax of Americas, right? And one of the things I did was just buy all of their U23 players. I'd seen the amounts of money that your Timber, your Martinez's, your Anthony's were going for, and I was like, if I can pick up some of these guys, which maybe are flying a little bit under the radar in January and December, basically, then when they kick in the summer months, they're either going to be really strong and I can play them, or I can choose to sell them on. And in the end, I did choose to sell them on. So I did have a full rare River Plate side for, I trained them up from buying them in January. I bought Enzo Fernandez for 0.12 and Armani for 0.4, and all the decent bargains you could get back in December if you were buying America. And I anticipate, there'll be similar situations again this year. But then when I got to the America season, to the summer, I was talking to you and a few others in our chat, and I was like, guys, I think I'm just going to sell again. Like, there were pieces that I wanted to improve again in my Challenger teams and my All-Star teams, in my U23 teams for the winter. And I felt like me not playing D3 or Rare Pro divisions in the summer and just running a River Plate lineup, which a lot of people were going to have, and it didn't really offer me enough variance. I felt like, I was either going to have to invest significantly more in America to get competitive. Seeing all your guys' teams, I was like, I'm not really going to be competing that much. And I sort of thought, I can sell these guys now at like the right time to sort of to get as much yield. I basically thought that I would yield more selling them now than I would from playing the summer with the lineup. So I sold them and bought some. I bought the Dynamo Zagreb stack. So I sold all of the River Plate players and then bought a full Dynamo Zagreb stack for D3. So Livakovic, Ristovski super rare, Misic super rare, Satalo, who I've since sold, Bruno Petkovic. And I targeted some late European weeks in the end of last season as well with those players. There was one game week where only Zagreb were the licensed team playing, and I was able to pick up basically a 3-star reward in D3, which was nice.
I remember that was the week where was the week that forced Sorare's hand to like make it, if you scored 0 you wouldn't get a prize.
Yeah, so they crazy.
That was such a ridiculous week. Like, thinking back on it, I wish I'd just purchased like any random limited just to play, because like I think people were like something stupid, like 70 people won with 0, something crazy. But I'm glad they have subsequently changed it, because that ruling was stupid. Absolutely. I remember Sean Newsham, PSU, he got a podium once. Yeah. He got like a podium in D2 with 0, and it was just like, nice free money for you this week, Sean.
But so I think like the reason why I was so patient, and again, I didn't feel like I was losing a lot of value from not playing the summer, because I couldn't get engaged in the games like I do in Europe, because I couldn't watch the games. I was asleep whilst the games were playing, and so I wasn't as attached to the cards, and I didn't feel as bad like getting rid of them. And then the other thing, which was, I think, maybe the deciding factor in doing that this year, was that I realized the summer break in Europe was just really, really short. Like I mentioned, we had Croatia and Russia come back. They've already had, what is this, third game week or fourth game week, something like that. Third game week, I think. They've already had like 3 games, and with some Belgian League playoff stuff and with some Nations League stuff, I didn't actually stop playing until the sort of middle of May. So I basically had 6 weeks to wait until I could play again, which I thought was and to be honest, mate, I just was a bit run down of playing Sorare for a little bit from like when getting into the end of the European season. I was like, do you know what? I'm actually looking forward to having a bit of a break. So I think, that is how I was able to stay patient. I definitely was ready to come back and play when it kicked back off in July. But I think that was sort of my reasoning. I was able to sell the America cards I had bought earlier in the year for a lot of profit. I even got rid of them in a bundle, and I probably could have got much more money for them if I'd just held them. But I wanted to make some quick moves with the ETH, basically. So I was able to realize profit on those, more profit I thought than if I carried on running the lineup. And I think that probably is correct. River Plate, although they've had a few good wins, they haven't been consistently great this summer. I don't think they've been as good as people thought they would be, me included. I think the reason was just that the summer break was short. I wasn't as engaged in American football as I was in European football. I thought that I could add some real quality to my European lineups. I bought, Celtic players, basically, and Zagreb players with the River Plate funds and some other funds that I had through selling some other cards. So, I think, that puts me in a really strong position for now, basically, and, up until the World Cup. I think, I think the sacrifice of doing that I've justified it, basically, with the pieces I brought into my gallery.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It has been, you talked about River Plate there. It has been an odd summer, because I think everyone thought that they were going to absolutely smash like they did towards the end of last season.
Yeah.
But I think people forgot that there was actually a period last season where they weren't very good. And then like they went on an absolutely storming run at the end of the season. And I think what was interesting about it is like I personally, I made a lot of moves to try and put myself in a good position for under 23 in the summer. But then Enzo left to join Benfica.
Yeah.
And my under 23s have actually really been fairly flat, to be honest. And it was quite interesting. Like I was looking back the other day at I sort of doubled down in the summer because I had a couple of quite solid cards. I had Gil, who admittedly has not performed as well as everyone thought he would. I had Enzo, who he was a summer option that I invested in, and then he quickly became not a summer option because he transferred to Benfica. But sort of looking back on it, I think one of the trades that I made was I traded Van Kronbrugge for Blake and Samith.
Yep.
And Blake has actually been, if I look back at what I've won with Blake, he's, I've won Carranza, I've won Morris, and Raul Rui Diaz. So I won 3 T1s that, in all reality, I probably wouldn't have won if I hadn't, sort of doubled down and tried to strengthen the teams that I already had. But I think, I was already in a position whereby I felt I had quite a strong collection of attack-minded players for summer. And I sort of really needed to lock in that, upgraded goalkeeper and defender option. I bought Andre Blake and Kai Wagner because I'd initially, my sort of focus, and when I sort of first started playing America, was I bought Carlos Acevedo and Felix Torres. And I think literally the moment I bought into Santos Laguna in Liga MX, they have been absolutely trashed. But what is interesting now is, I sort of made the plan to, sort of trade into stronger teams over the summer, and then keep maybe some of the meta players like Gil and Cecilia, and run them with some of my stronger, challenger players, just because you've got this sort of wonderfully long period of overlap this season because everything's been squished because of the World Cup. So my whole idea was to try and win as much as I could when only America and Asia were playing. I didn't really dive into Asia. I've got a couple of really strong cards that I run in global, but I didn't really play Asia because of sort of perceived lack of liquidity on cards. Sure. But then the challenge is now is that a lot of the America players, I sold out of a couple of them. So Julian Carranza, at the time I won him, I was like, okay, he's on a bit of a heater, and actually my under 23 forward depth is pretty strong, so I don't need him, so I sold him quite quickly. But then Raul Rui Diaz, I was like, I'll wait for him to come back from injury and then I'll sell him. So I was being quite patient with him, but then the sort of floor on most America cards has completely collapsed. So then I'm now in the position of okay, well, am I patient? Do I hold all of these cards through to next season, or do we see a sort of recovery in the price of America cards? Because I think what I've seen is it seems like a lot of people are selling out of America, not so much Asia, because Asia was never really as popular, but they're selling out of America and Asia and buying maybe Challenger Euro because they want to compete, and they think, the new season's starting, they want to compete. But I'm not really sure the wider Sorare community has fully acknowledged how big this overlap is and what the impact of this overlap is going to be on prizes. Because now we've basically got a 2 to 3 month window, pretty much from now until the World Cup. Although Japan finishes slightly earlier, and MLS, it obviously depends if your team gets to the playoff. But we've basically just got an absolutely golden period for rewards, because everything's going to be playing for quite a while. We had everything's going to be playing at the end of last season, and I think if I remember rightly, it ran for about six weeks approximately. Whereas now we've got double the length of period where all of the teams are playing. And I've sort of been having this sort of dilemma because Morris and Raul Rui Diaz were prizes, but then I've gone out and bought Savarino as a forward, who's my number one pick for forward. And then I've got players like Kankara. And I was looking at it the other day and I was like, I don't need all of these America forwards. Like I think I had something stupid like 7 or 8 rares, and I'm like, I only play, rare and rare pro. Like I don't need all of these. But then I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, well, Raul Ruiz was trading for like 0.5, 0.6 ETH not that long ago.
Yeah.
And then it's just been very unfortunate that he's been injured during this sort of cool down of America's prices with everyone like pulling out and going to Europe. So I'm like, okay, do I be patient and wait, or do I cash that out and try and strengthen my Euro sides again? Because I think, I was looking at it the other day and I was like, realistically, I need another Challenger Euro goalkeeper if I want to run Challenger Europe Rare and Rare Pro. But then the other sort of flip side to it is like, do we see people moving back into America if there is an opportunity to win in global and the price of Challenger and sort of European-based cards spiral?
Yeah.
Because if you look at Rui Diaz when he's fit, he's a very regular goal scorer. Like and he scores well. So then it's like if he drops down to like 0.2 ETH, then it's like, okay, well, what can you get comparatively in Europe? So yeah. I'm having this quandary, and I completely get like I sort of look at it very much purely from the numbers perspective, as I'm like, how much is player A going to cost me, and what's their expected scores? Whereas I completely appreciate your point. And I think like the wider Sorare community more enjoy being able to watch along with the games. Like for me, like America, I'm not watching those games because most of the time I'm asleep. So like I sort of have this like waking up roulette of like, did they play well? Did they play well? Yes, they did well. Amazing. My team's so like, sort of like this weird like anticipation and excitement when you wake up, like logging into Sorare data, check your scores, and you're like, oh no, they did terribly. Whereas like now I'm really enjoying, like just before this call, I was, watching a bit of the Gameweek Liège match, and it is, super exciting to be able to watch your team live. Yeah, I just think it's sort of a really interesting one because the patience extends not just in terms of the choice of when to play, but the choice of hold versus sell. Like I've gone through a couple of periods where I've just gone, okay, I want to change things up. I'm selling all of these as a bundle. They're gone. I've got my new targets that I want to buy.
Yeah.
Is that always the right decision? Probably not. Like, there's been some players actually I think I got out of at the right time. Like I was not patient with David Ochoa. Sort of saw signs that, the coach was talking up Zach McMath, and I was like, something's odd's going on here because Ochoa was, great for them last season. I got out of Ochoa when he was like 1 ETH. He might rebound now. He's going back to DC, but that would have been a lot of money tied up in David Ochoa all summer.
Yeah, sure.
Not be using him. But I remember in the same bundle deal, I also sold Robert Liverchich because I was looking at the time, and his scores, to be fair, his scores at Rapid were fairly average. Like, they were middle of the road. Like, he rarely got decisive. Like, he was in that sort of 45 to 55 range for a lot of his scores. And I sort of lost patience with him, and then he's gone to Zagreb and is absolutely smashing. So I think it's like an interesting one. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Like, thinking about when to sell a player, like when to be patient versus, when to just be fairly cutthroat and go, you know what, actually, I'm just sat on a ton of ETH here that could be used to improve my teams. And I think I've always been, I've still got an overly inflated gallery, if I'll be honest. But I've tried to be quite ruthless with going, okay, if I'm sat on these players and there's no like midterm horizon of they're going to be usable for me in the, I sort of look at it as like, if I don't see a player being usable for me in the next 3 to 6 months, then I'll try and get rid of them. But then, as an example, I had Ozan Tufan, who was one of my very first signings on Sorare when he was playing at Fenerbahce, and he was he's a pretty solid scorer there. He did really well for me in the first season, and then that summer he got a transfer to Watford and just completely died. and I ended up looking. I think like at the time I was very loss averse. I was early on the platform. I was like, oh no, I don't want to sell him. No, I can't sell him for like 40% of his value that I paid for him. And I remember I just kind of like consigned him to the depths of the gallery and sort of thought, you know what, I'm going to forget about this. And then he's popped back up this weekend because he's signed for Hull City and he's in the Championship, and suddenly he's become like a serviceable, usable car for me. But I think, throughout my Sorare journey, I have been fairly ruthless. I tend to, I suppose, be a little bit more ruthless with players that are over 23.
Yes.
Because you see, like the under 23 players, like I've got a bunch of them, like Nicola Ravella, Ivan Ilic. There's a bunch of ones that I'm just like, actually they don't get near my side, but they're kind of at that age of like, if they do get a favourable transfer, then we know what happens to under 23s when they get a favourable transfer, or a start. In the case of goalkeepers. So I'd just be really interested to hear your thoughts on it, because I think sometimes I try to be patient and then I'm like, no, I really need to upgrade this team, and then I'll just get rid of a load. And like, I'm like, okay, fine. Like, I can write that off because, say I lose like 0.2 ETH on selling off all these cards. I've just unlocked like 1.5 ETH, which is going to strengthen my team. And then, if I'm basically then I'm targeting, I'm like, okay, well, in like the next 2 to 3 months, I need to win X amount value of cards to make that trade net positive for me, or make that trade worthwhile. But I'd be really interested, because I think like we've always talked about decisions around transfers and buying and selling players, but I don't think I've ever really asked you, like, do you have a set approach to this, or do you treat it by a case basis, or like me, do you tend to hoard under 23s, knowing that if they have a good couple of games, they're probably going to absolutely fly in price anyway? I say, as I have about 9 Carlos Cuestas at the moment, hoping for a solid score or two from him.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it's very much specific to what your gallery is, like what position you are in Sorare. PSU, Sean Newsham always talks about how he basically just like never sells anything under the age of 23. Like he'll just, even if someone's the biggest shitter on the platform, if they're under 23, like he'll just hold them until they get into a better position, and then make a view on them. And that's sort of how I like to play it. And I think it is very much split up into like 2 categories. You've basically got like prospects, and then like proven players, or maybe not even proven players, but like non-prospects, let's just say. And I think I would much rather hold the prospects long term, even if they're worth a considerable amount of ETH. I have a Jay Gorter, for instance, who I bought a long time ago and have held for a long time, just because I think he's an exciting young goalie, he says, after he's just let him 5 against PSV yesterday. I think I definitely do it more with goalkeepers. I've also got Verbruggen, Nico Mantle, these sorts of players I like to hold. And it is tricky because they are worth a lot of ETH. Those 3 goalkeepers combined are probably like 3 or 4 ETH. I've got there in goalkeepers that aren't playing. And I think, and again, even with outfield prospects, I actually did sell a Mohamed Kudus about 4 weeks ago, just because I thought with the additions Ajax have made and, Kenneth Taylor coming through, they've also filled up on additional winger spots. They've kept Anthony. They've bought Bergwijn. They've still got Tadic that can play on the wing, which is another position Kudus could play, although he's predominantly a central midfield player. I just sort of thought he wouldn't get as much game time this year, and he didn't get much game time last year at all, and I'd held him all through that, and I just sort of lost my patience with him a little bit. I was like, right, I'm going to get rid of him. He's a decent chunk of ETH. He's like half an ETH or something. And since then, in pre-season, he's probably been the biggest winner out of the Ajax players in pre-season. He scored a good goal yesterday. He's played really well throughout the friendlies, and actually wouldn't surprise me if he started next week against Fortuna Sittard over Kenneth Taylor or David Klaassen in the 10 or 8 position. But that is a bit of an anomaly for me. I guess I wouldn't normally do that. So I think with prospects, I would much rather hold until they get a run of games, get one game if you're talking about a goalkeeper or a potentially favourable transfer. And even then, like, the Verbruggen transfer news, I think normally quite a lot of managers might look to sell out of that. It wasn't concrete he was going to Burnley. He didn't go to Burnley in the end, but his price was inflated so much that it looked like it was a done deal, right? I actually did. Yeah, it was, he basically went up to 2 ETH. And I still do hold Verbruggen, and I would have held through that because of the utility he could have given me this season. But yeah, I think with your non-prospect players, I am much more impatient with them. I think you probably remember last season with Ruud Vormer. I bought Ruud Vormer for like 0.3 ETH at the beginning of last season, and had a good run of games. Actually, probably the season before. Yeah. Anyway, bought Ruud Vormer at some point for a decent chunk of ETH, and in the end ended up selling him for like 0.05, just because I was like, I think it is time to just cut your losses and be done with this type of player. Same goes for a bunch of other players. The Lask Super Air stack I had from last year, they didn't do a lot in the second half of last year, a lot less than what I thought they would. And so in the off season, they were gone. And I think another thing which really influences my decision on this is if I have targets that I want to purchase. If I don't have any ETH and I'm not looking to put any more money into the platform at that moment, who are my dispensable players? Who are the players that I don't class as prospects, that I don't think it's going to be massively detrimental to me to move on now and in 6 months' time then be worth 5, 6, 7, 10x what they were when I sold them, So I'm trying to identify who are dispensable players, who are players that, if I don't need the ETH, I'll just sit on them, until they become a more valuable asset, or until they get game time again, or a number of these things. But if I need some ETH, who are my dispensable players that I actually don't mind getting rid of and can get a decent amount for? And at that point, I'll make a decision on how patient I want to be or don't want to be with the cards, essentially.
Yeah, I think I do follow a similar approach, to be honest. I think like there's certain ones that I'm like, like I don't want to get rid of this player, even if they're not part of the what I sort of see as my cohort of lineup, like players that I would consider using in a lineup each week. Like I do tend to play fixtures, but I sort of intuitively know which players might get a chance. There was and to put it into the prospect ones, like Nathaniel Santini is a really good example of that for me. I actually bought his super rare for like 0.15. Like it was something stupid. Like it was really, really cheap at the time. And I bought him because I'd looked at stats on, I hadn't seen him play, but I'd watched some stats on Yscout, and he looked like a decent prospect. Like he's, sort of wins a lot of duels, plays out from the back. And then Sion, that seemed to genuinely be a pretty crisis club anyway. Like they changed their manager, he was dropped, he then got injured, and I'm thinking, oh, do I just like get out of this guy because I'm just like, a bit fed up? And I was like, no, like he's a 21-year-old centre back, he's good on the ball, like I'd be mad to do it. And then this weekend he's just dropped an 84.
Banged a monster, hasn't he? Yeah, wow.
Yeah, he just dropped a huge score. And like I'll be honest, like I was very close to selling him, and I think even if you look back, I might have listed him a couple of times, like just because I was like very desperate to get some ETH in to put some other targets, But I think and it sounds odd, but I think I've got more patient as the quality of my rewards have increased, because it's given me more liquidity to sell the rewards. For the first 6 months, and if you look back at what I won, I tend to win very like regularly, but like tons of T3s, like loads of them. And then the T2s and T1s that I won ended up being like the ones that got caught by the Sorare value lag. So, Tony Martinez was one, Nicolas Acevedo was another, there was Leon Flack at Philadelphia. They were all like top end T1s, but by the time I got them, they were worth like maybe 30 to 40% what everything around them in the pool was. And I think there were times there where I got really frustrated, in the sense that I was like, oh no, come on, I should be doing better. Like I want to push to win more tier ones, or I want to push to win stars, but I didn't want to put money into the platform, and I'm sort of like trying to liquidate what I've got. But then sometimes I think if you're being impatient, you can make decisions that you'd live to regret.
Yeah.
But then I think it comes back to that point around like, where is your gallery? What are your aims for your gallery? Because if I look at it, like, I've always wanted to be stronger in under 23, but I acknowledge when I first joined the platform that I haven't got the bankroll to buy into elite under 23. Like, I've got to be patient. I've got to play my way into under 23. I've got to identify players that are going to be able to, like, something will change. They'll become more favorable. They will in time become the players that are valuable. Jens Odegaard is one example of that. And you talked about Understall in the sense that you knew the player was quality, and the moment you saw that the transfer was in the offing, you're like, okay, brilliant. Well, I know I can be patient with that player because I know that there's an upside there when they start. And Odegaard was that one of like, I actually bought him before AZ was confirmed, but I'm thinking, okay, well, this guy's clearly too good for Wallach. Apologies to any fans of RKC listening in, but you could see last season he was too good for them, and there was a period where I think I even bought him when he went Red X, which I don't know why he went Red X because he was still a Sassuolo player, but like there's this weird period where Opta like stuck him as a Red X. I'm like, okay, I'm going to grab him because he was like 0.2, 0.25, something around that region. But I was sort of like looking at it, and I was making an assessment on the upside and thinking, okay, yes, brilliant. Like if I hold on to this guy, there's a really good chance because AZ are a really, really good attacking team. And like Santini was kind of in that same vibe of, I was going, look, there's no way that I'm going to have like a straight shootout to buy under 23 super rares that are starting, that are capable of me competing in under 23 right here, right now. So I've kind of tried to buy a couple more prospects and be patient with them. Hannes Delcroix is one that I really have had to be patient with because I bought him and then he got injured like that very same week. And my immediate was like, oh, do I ditch him? But then I was like, you know what? Like, I've got what I believe is a very promising under 23 super rare for like 0.3 ETH. So I'm like, okay, no, I'm gonna hold him, and like touch wood, he does seem to be fit at the start of this season, which is good. And then the other one is Zerbelos. So I'm like, I strongly believe he has the talent that should be playing more regularly, but for one reason or another, he's in and out of that team. And I'm like, oh, like do I just cut out of him? And get someone that I know plays week in, week out. But then I'm like, okay, well, no, like Zeballos, I feel like he could move to Europe. And if he gets like a favourable move to a challenger Europe side, then he probably 3x's in price overnight. Like, you see what happens. Like, if Zeballos goes to like a top 3 or top 5 team in the Eredivisie, like the demand for him will just like go skyrocket. So I think, I do sort of, although I don't sort of, or haven't broadly stated it before this call, I think I've sort of followed that same approach with yourself. In like, patience isn't binary. There's a lot more fluid in the sense that I'm making an assessment on that player's ability to deliver in the future compared to my immediate needs. And I think that it can be really difficult to strike that balance and sort of say when is the right time. And go back to your point as well, is that it is very different for people of different gallery sizes. I think if my gallery size was a lot smaller, I think I would you'd kind of be forced to be more ruthless. Yes. Because if you're riding players into the ground and then you don't have more money to put into the platform, then people are, oh, I don't want to take a loss. But then it's like, okay, well, you take a loss, but what is the possibility of strengthening your team with that ETH that you got? And I think like the really interesting one here, and I know you sort of mentioned it just before the call, but like limited. Like the limited prices can be up and down like a yo-yo. Like, I've been, I don't really play limited like the set divisions, but I'm going to be honest, I absolutely love the specialist tournament. And I'm intentionally not being patient with those players because the under 40 players, like I am buying them for the matchup. Like that's it. Like I'm literally like targeting 2 players in the under 40 slot that I think have a good matchup that weekend that can hopefully put me in the mix for a decent prize. So I'm already going into that with a mindset of going, okay, I'm not going to be patient. I'm buying them. I'm bringing them in for 1 week. I'm trading in and out of fixtures, and I so most likely I'm going to take a loss selling back out of that player. But it then becomes a calculation of, is that expected loss going to be offset by what I could win? Which I think is sort of an interesting way of looking at it. And like, I'm under 23 super rares is like max level patience for me. Limited over 23s, I'm like, oh well, I'll just get another. So I think it is really interesting when you think about that, and it's like it's contextual patience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a really good point you touched on there is like the opportunity cost of taking a loss on players. Like I do think you're right. Like lots of people on the platform are like, I don't want to say scared, but like apprehensive of taking ETH losses or fiat losses on their players. And I think it's a really good point you make is that, you might be taking a loss on one player that you bought 6 months ago or what have you, and you've held because you didn't want to take a loss on him. But actually, what opportunities does it give you when you unlock the ETH from the player to go ahead and you can sit on that player for another 6 months and he might become more valuable and you might be able to turn a profit on him. But actually, if you'd sold him the 6 months prior and bought someone else which can improve your gallery, how much are you winning in that time frame that you would have just sat on that player with the ETH locked up in him. I think like the big patience players like Donnarumma last season, for instance, I genuinely don't believe that there were many galleries on the platform that should have had a Donnarumma last year. Like I think unless you had like a 200 plus ETH gallery, like there probably wasn't much point in having Donnarumma, just because of how expensive he was and for how unlocked of a starter he was. And so like if you had one and you had like a reasonable sized gallery or like a more budget friendly gallery, like I don't think he's a player you should have been holding on to for the to try and make a payday or cash in on him at a later date. I think you should be selling him, realizing your ETH, and then sticking that into a team to try and make more back than what you would have done if you just held him and sold him now. It's maybe a poor example because obviously he's extremely expensive now because of everything that's the PSG goalkeeper situation. But I think the point is correct, right? Like if you have a player which is not playing or not contributing to your gallery, but enormously outweighs the ratio of like their cost compared to your gallery, then I'd sort of feel like no matter what the price you bought them at, like if you can get some decent returns in and build your squads out better for selling them, and I sort of think like that's the play, and maybe that's something to be like impatient with. But yeah, I think like the opportunity cost of patience is something that you really have to weigh up. Like, what is going to be the best for me to do in this situation? Is it going to be to remain patient with this player? Like, I'll use Jay Gorter again as an example. I've sat on him for a long time. He made some awful mistakes yesterday. If he hadn't made awful mistakes yesterday, does he go into the season as Ajax's number one? Maybe yes. If he does that, how expensive is his card? 4 ETH? 5 ETH for a rare? Maybe. What's Diego Costa? That'd be a good comp. I know Gorter is not going to be the national goalkeeper, whereas Diego Costa is, but like similar team stature and stuff like that. And I genuinely think that people pay more for Ajax players because they're Ajax players. So yeah, I think you're looking at least 4 ETH for the Gorters.
Yeah, last sale on Diego Costa is 4.4. So you've definitely got the upside there. And I think that's the interesting point. I know one of the guys in the chat earlier was talking about, just like buying up a bunch of America's players because they are so cheap right now, and there's obviously been quite a drop off in their prices. But I think what's interesting here is again it comes back to that cost benefit analysis in saying, okay, well, if you're locking up, say half an ETH, right, and you buy 1, 2, 3 players, like whatever it is, and you're looking up half an ETH, and your potential upside is that you make a 20% profit on those purchases when the prices bounce back up and America starts up again, and people are like, oh, I want to buy more American cards. You do see this very cyclical demand in Americas, and
Yes.
as the platform goes on longer, there should be more people able to actually analyze when is that happening, and when to buy in, and when could you potentially make a bit of profit if you're patient. But then, if you think about it this way, do America's cards increase in value again before the World Cup? Because if you're not confident in that happening, then you're basically committing to locking up that ETH for 6 months until 2023. And if you're committing to lock that up for 6 months in exchange for a 15 to 20% profit, is it worth it?
Seems like a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, because you talk about like people saying, people potentially reluctant to take a loss. Are people maybe overvaluing any profit? Because for me, I'm like, if I've got to wait 7 months to get a 20% increase, is that the best use of that ETH, or could I have bought someone that actually levels up my team? Because say you put in half an ETH and you have a rare team that isn't like winning a T1 a month, then you have to think about the amount of times that you could potentially win something. Not like say you're taking a 20%, like 20% on 0.5 is 0.1 ETH.
Mm-hmm.
I'd argue you need to win one T2 rare in 6 months to cover that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So then it's a case of going, okay, well, I'm chasing profit and I'm being patient, but actually,
should I be?
Patience the best play in that scenario? I'd argue not, but then I'm someone that's I'm very focused on I want to win, and I want to win very frequently, and if I don't win very frequently, I'll get annoyed. So I'm sometimes a little bit impatient with cards and selling them out because I want to unlock that ETH to immediately strengthen my team. And that was what I did with Liberchich last season. I was not competing in under 23 rare. It wasn't happening. And I had Liberchich, popping up 45s, and then Feyenoord and PSV would play, and I'd be like, oh, and there goes the Gameweek. So for me at that time, the cost of holding him or playing him when my under 23 just wasn't competing, I just felt that wasn't very valuable. And I think I cashed out of him, and I think that might have been the time that I bought Ito. And I bought Ito, and to be fair, Ito has been a great player for me. He has, I think won me 3 or 4 pretty decent cards in a not very long period of time. But then the issue is now is obviously I've held Ito, and Ito's gone to Reims, and that is definitely not a favourable move. And the Sorare data price chart definitely shows that. Whereas Liberchich has gone completely the other way. He was not doing very well. I don't say not doing very well because his peak scores just weren't there. If you don't have average scores as a player, you realistically aren't going to be winning anything of note. And it's gone completely the other way. So I think if I were to be critical of myself, I probably could have just, been a little bit more patient with a young player there. But the trade was that I bought Ito, and Ito won me 4 cards. So then it's okay, well, actually, if I look on a pure profit play, I potentially left 0.6 ETH on the table.
Yep.
Because I didn't hold Liberchich through that price rise. But the value of the cards that I won with Ito exceeded that.
Yeah.
More than made up for that. So then it's was it a bad move or wasn't it a bad move? And I think that it is considering those variables when you are weighing up whether to be patient or not to be patient, I think is really important, because it's not a simple yes or no
it's not quite black and white.
A lot of the time it's conditional. It's oh, well, if this then that, which I think I find it really interesting, and I think it adds a real element of strategy to the game, because it's very easy to go and buy someone. If you've got an ETH balance, you can go and do it right there, right now, and you've bought someone off the market within a minute. But I think selling people is a lot. People think a lot more and potentially are more risk averse when it comes to selling people than they are just buying someone. And that's what I find quite interesting about weighing up patience.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. I was going to make another point there, actually. I think it is really also interesting, the patience of like limited market. And I think this is just because of the scarcity. I think what I mean by that is like Brandon Michele isn't starting for Club Brugge today. He is on the bench. So I would be really surprised if I look at Michele's price graph that he does not have a bunch of sales way below his. Yes, like is just been announced, obviously, but there's literally the previous sale was at 0.08. And then this
someone's
one
already crashed through the floor, haven't they?
Exactly. Yeah, the most recent one at 0.0672 now. I think that's really interesting as well. And I think it just must be because there's more supply and people are just more. I don't want to say degen-y. That's maybe a bad phrase, but they're less patient with limited cards because I think they maybe perceive them as cheap, and they perceive them as they're obviously very liquid. Because there's lots of buyers and there's lots of cards. But I always think that's really interesting, like the fickleness of he might be on the bench today and then come back next week and score 100, right? In which case his price just goes back up again. But I just always think it's interesting the lack of patience in the limited market and a lot of the performance-based like buying we see based on what somebody has or hasn't done. Gus Till. And this is maybe getting a little bit off topic, but Gus Till off the back of his hat trick yesterday, which was not even an SO5 scored game. Like his limited price graph, if my Sorare data is bugging out, but just spiked massively on the back of that game. And I think that's again like down to people like not being patient. They're like, oh wow, Gus Till's just scored a hat trick. Let me go buy him now. Like I want him now. And I think that's I just think that's interesting that we have such fluctuations based on nothing but player score. Wow, it even happened to his rare as well. But his limited went from 0.049 to 0.11 in the space of 2 hours, basically. So
wow.
Over 100% pump. So I just think that's really interesting, and I don't know, maybe it's why I don't dabble in the limited market as much, but just because of the the volatility.
Yeah, I mean, I do, and I really try not to buy in-form players.
Yeah.
And because I know that it's kind of a very leveraged position, and if they drop in form, they drop in price very quickly. I mean, I kind of broke that rule buying Carlos Vela because I wanted a couple of like absolute smashers for my specialist team. So I bought Vela, I bought Sinjin Ho, I bought Pozuelo this week. Pozuelo was 0.02 ETH for limited. Like, literally nothing. Like, and then he scored yesterday, and suddenly that's bounced back up again. But for me, what I've done is I've actually been patient with limiteds, and I've done this a few times with quite a great deal of success. I did it with Zach McMath, and I did it with Yuki Kobayashi. And if I see a player that I think is undervalued in limited, I'll go and buy like 15 of them. But they've got to be cheap. Like I'm not going in and doing this with like a Messi or an Neymar and thinking, they're going to pump in a month or so. I'm getting players that I'm like, their price doesn't make sense. And I did it with Kasim Adams recently because he was like a DNP at Hoffenheim in Germany, and then he's gone to FC Basel in Switzerland, and I'm like, yes, champion to challenger move. Yeah, have some of that. Thank you very much. And I think I bought maybe 17 or 18 of his cards. He's only got about 200 minted, so I'm literally sitting on about 15% of supply at the moment. But I bought them in at 0.008. They were 10 euros a card. It was literally so cheap. And he's already 50% increase, and he's only played one game. And he's someone that is going to be eligible for specialist in his next match.
Right.
I'm not sure if he's able to play midweek in the Conference League qualifier because he wasn't able to play last midweek, and that's why he's only played one game so far because he wasn't registered for the Conference League. But he's like locked in starter. In his first game, he racked up like 80 passes, a load of duels.
Oh, lovely.
And I'm looking comparably, and I'm like, okay, well, the limited market hasn't realised yet, but I know when they do, he's pumping hard because his scoring profile is very similar to Wesley Holt at this level. And I'm looking, I'm like, oh, well, Holt's 0.06. So if I grab this guy at like 0.08, I just need to wait for, I need to be patient and wait for that like realization, because what you tend to see, I think, with limited is like, once the market starts moving, people are like, oh, I need to get in. And they go with it. Or once the market starts selling, they're like, oh, I need to get out. And it's really interesting watching how impatient the limited market is. I don't really I've not been an active trader on Sorare per se. Like, I have traded in and out of cards. I've made some really good profits on cards by being patient and identifying mostly under 23s. I don't do this approach with rare because the liquidity is not at that same level. But I think with limited, like, if you can identify some players that, you see how you get these cycles. Like you said, Gus Till had a good performance, and boom, up goes his price curve. I've done the same with Carlos Cuesta. Like, I've stacked up a load of those because I'm like, okay, well, under 23 centre back that's got a history of decent scores, albeit at the end of last season he's injured, he had COVID. Under 23 player, stackable with Van der Voort. Why is he selling for 0.015? Right. When other under 23 sell for 0.1. So in that sense, like, I do have a trading strategy around being patient in limited, which, is just completely different. But again, like, that's that sort of cost benefit, and that's like picking out some of those players that you're getting right at the bottom. And I really do try to avoid buying top limiteds, because you can see that drop off quite quickly as well. Yeah. I do find it really interesting, and I know you sort of dabbled recently. You've got a little bit more involved, just in sort of playing that specialist, and I think it is really eye-opening on the platform. Like, if you're someone that's been around since limited didn't exist, and you're like, no, I'm still going to play rare, and you actually like get involved in limited, and you're like, okay, well, this is an entirely different market.
It's so weird. It operates
in completely different ways.
Yeah, it really is. It's crazy. I think the difference in the scarcities. And yeah, you're right. I looked at the limited market and I was like, this should be relatively straightforward for me to puzzle out and make some decent trades. And it's just not. Like, it's very irrational and very impatient and impulsive. Like, there's lots of impulsive buys. If we go back to the Gus Till, Till pumped up to 0.11 last night, 9 p.m. By 9 a.m. he's back down to 0.085. And it's just because, people have impulsively, a bit like you said, they buy in like bulk or like bunches, like, people have bought into that hype train and, oh, that's the cheapest one, I'll just buy that. He's going to the moon, whatever. And then actually it settles back down to a price which is more at his value, basically.
Because that's...
Sorry, go on.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, I think that's an element of impatience showing as well. Yeah. Because what you'll see is players or managers that have bought players very cheap, when they see the price spikes, you get a wave of undercutters that come in about 12 or so hours later. And you get this initial price pump where it just runs up and everyone's just buying cheapest on the market, like bam, 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 bam. And you see that sort of vertical line of like the value of the card just absolutely skyrocketing. And then what happens, you see a bunch of other impatient managers go, oh, you know what, I want to take a buck on this. And then they'll start undercutting each other because they can take a profit, any profit. Yeah. And you see these really interesting cycles where it like runs straight up the ladder, curves down slowly as everyone starts undercutting each other, and then something else happens to run up the ladder again. And then you get these sort of like, it looks like a wave pattern on the value chart. And I just find it like absolutely crazy. Like, I really do. And this is how I ended up, like, I bought and sold like 10 or 12 Yuki Kobayashis because I was watching the Vissel Kobe game. And I think this was just an advantage of the time zones, is that I was watching the game and I saw he got a clearance off the line and he already had solid AA. And I was like, oh, this guy's going to like smack 100 today because he's got that clearance off the line. Lo and behold, he got 100. Europe woke up and went, this guy's got 100. I need to buy him. Yeah. And I literally bought and sold 10 within the space of about 4 hours because of that lack of patience. And someone saw that a player had just pumped a really good score out and they just wanted to try and jump on that bandwagon. And you see that so often. And like you said, it doesn't just happen with scored matches, it happens with the unscored ones as well. So I think there's definitely, you know, it's not always predictable. And I think that this is the thing, is I try to logic a lot of situations. And I think that sometimes you cannot apply logic to how the limited market behaves, because it is just, you know, people responding to others' actions and feeling like they're going to miss out. And that's why you see like this, you know, much greater volatility because of the increased liquidity. Yeah. But yeah, I think there's definitely lessons to be learned from either being patient or, you know, making an active decision to not be patient.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you everyone for listening in. I think it's been interesting. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation today on patience. And yeah, until next time, if anyone's got any thoughts or any examples on when they've been patient or not been patient, or even wants to ask if they should be patient, then jump into the comments below and we will see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, mate. See ya.